China is not known as a sporty nation, so when it comes to an event like the Olympics, where athletes compete on the highest level, you would think that a country that plays sports more would perform better than a country where their sports culture is not as strong. But in the Paris Olympics, China and the US, a very sport-dominant nation, won the same amount of gold medals. How did this happen? Well, China was able to go toe-to-toe with the sporting giant, all because of one man and 5 words. And China's strategy also explains a common observation of China crushing certain sports, but falling apart when it comes to others. But before we look into the how, let's examine the why, because winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. China wanted a gold medal at the Olympics. The Olympics because it's the most prestigious sporting event in the world, and gold because they needed to win. You see, back in the 1980s, China had just rejoined the Olympic Committee after years of isolation, and it was only through winning that China could really prove themselves on an international stage and bring the whole nation together. But they had a problem. Compared to other countries, China didn't have a strong sports culture. Years of political instability, economic constraints, and a lack of priority given to sports limited the availability of it to the public, which then meant that China couldn't exactly draw upon a big pool of athletes to represent them in the Olympics. So, inspired by the Soviet Union, China adopted the approach of, if you can't find elite athletes, make them. And that was the start of China's centralized sports system. This is a system where the state controls and funds everything, from identifying talent at a young age to training them up, providing them with coaches and gyms. Everything is sponsored by the state. It's a very hands-on approach, but China had to be this intentional with their actions if they wanted to be competitive on the world stage, because they lacked an organic sporting culture for talent to emerge at a grassroots level. If China is on one end of the spectrum in terms of their sports structure being very centralized, so influencing sports from the top down, then the US is an example of the other side of the spectrum, where sport is built from the ground up. From a young age, kids get involved with sports through their school or through extracurricular clubs, and those that continue to play and become athletes join elite clubs or specialized programs. Funding usually comes from private sponsors, though the government does get more involved for Olympic sports, and they also fund universities, which have athletic programs, so they're also indirectly funding their athletes. Most of the time though, in a decentralized system, the government is more hands-off, and talent emerges just from the sheer number of people that play sports. This also results in a wide pool of talent across many different disciplines. And since we have this spectrum going on, Australia is a great example of a system that sits somewhere in the middle. Australia has a strong sports culture. Aussie kids get really involved in sports, but the Australian government is a lot more involved. They fund a lot of the sports development programs, and they're also quite targeted with where they spend the money, often prioritizing the sports Australia is strongest in. This kind of targeting though is way more apparent in China's centralized sports system. Because China is in control from scouting talent to sending an athlete to the Olympics, the state is able to dictate exactly which sports all these athletes are going to train in. And of course, like Australia, the Chinese government is going to aim for sports that they're the strongest in or see the highest potential in. So, what sports did China land on? This is where I get to introduce to you one man and 5 words. And you're about to see just how impactful they were in changing the course of China's sport trajectory. When it comes to sports, we need to recognize that a lot of the sports we play today are descended from earlier versions of sports that were played. Like table tennis originated from England in the 1880s as the upper class wanted tennis at home, so they put a net over a dining table and then bam, table tennis was born. The fact that sports often share similarities with each other was the key idea behind Tian theory of clusters. For example, if you look at how sports are played, some involve a net, so sports like table tennis, badminton, volleyball, tennis, and beach volleyball. Or maybe they're a sport that requires no net, like basketball, hockey, soccer, and handball. Or maybe instead of throwing balls, you throw hands. Or instead of throwing hands, you throw shots. Or instead of throwing shots, you throw yourself. What I showed you just then was a legitimate way of grouping Olympic sports devised by Tian, though obviously I started getting creative with introducing them halfway through. You might have noticed though that we seem to be missing some sports, like maybe swimming, track and field, weightlifting, and that's because they all belong in a different category called physical sports, whereas the sports we mentioned just then are classified as skill-based sports. Aside from this non-net subcategory, China is really good at skill-based sports. In fact, weightlifting is probably the only sport in the physical category that China really dominates, and this occurrence was by design. Tian drew out 7 different ways to group different Olympic sports, and the categorization we went through just then was the most influential. Grouping sports was huge for China because it allowed them to see where the synergies were between sports they were already good at and could expand into. For example, diving and artistic gymnastics are 2 sports China is strong in. They both also happen to fall into the same category of being difficult and artistic. Another sport in this cluster that China was weaker in at the time was artistic swimming. Artistic swimming became a priority, and China was able to transfer a lot of the coaching knowledge, experience, and routine innovations from the strong sports into developing China's artistic swimming team. This year at the Paris Olympics, China's artistic swimming team won gold for the first time. Or take a look at this year's tennis results. Zheng Qingwen won gold in the women's single tennis event, and she was not just China's first gold, but Asia's first gold in the Olympic tennis singles. China's mixed double team also won a silver, which makes China the most successful team in tennis this Olympics. And you know what? Tennis is in the same net category as table tennis and badminton, 2 of China's core sports. The transferability of skills, expertise, knowledge, and even athletes in some cases within these identified clusters allowed China to more efficiently go after and achieve results within like sports. Tian's clustering theory had provided China with a direction for how they should plan for gold, and the 5-word principle executed that plan. Speaking of plans, did you guys know that when you connect to the internet on a public Wi-Fi plan, like at airports, coffee shops, or even at home, you're sharing a lot of your own information and putting that out into the open? It's like giving your parents your phone to show them one photo, and then they start swiping around and all of a sudden you develop the fastest reflexes ever. If you don't want that to happen, you need a VPN like private internet access. A virtual private network, or VPN for short, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. All of this happens in the background. Specifically for me, I noticed a difference in privacy when my ads became a lot less targeted. They used to be so specific, which is low-key a bit scary, but now when I browse through a VPN, I definitely feel a greater degree of separation, which I really appreciate. A VPN not only keeps you safe and gives you privacy online, it also comes with massive perks in general, like being able to watch shows that might be region locked. For example, one of my favorite shows is Khai Huynh Ngoc. I literally loved it so much that in my senior year, inspired by one of the actresses in the show, I decided to cut my hair short. And it was a horrible decision. I've been meaning to rewatch it though, but it's not available on Netflix. But with a VPN, I can change my location to Japan, and there you have it. I use VPNs to find shows all the time. This is my biggest hack. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not paying for 4 different streaming services because all the shows are split up in different places. Like, who has money for that nowadays? In this economy? With private internet access, you can add unlimited devices to one subscription. So gift your friends, your mom, your dad privacy and a global catalog of shows they'll never run out of watching. Use my link below to redeem 4 months for free and 83% off. Thank you Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video, and now back to exploring the 5-word principle. 小巧男女少, or small, skilled, difficult women and few, were the chosen disciplines that shouldered China's great ambitions for gold, and they each represent a trait or a sport. Small refers to small ball sports like table tennis and badminton. Skilled and difficult refer to sports being judged on difficulty and execution, like gymnastics and diving. Women highlights China's focus on targeting female sports, as it had less competition since it was less popular to watch female sports back then compared to the male events. Then finally, few meant less popular. Again, less popular equals less competition. China believed these categories maximized their chances for gold, and in looking at their medal counts, they were right. When we break down where China got their gold medals from, out of the 303 gold medals China has won so far in the Olympics, 219 or 72% come from 6 sports. They are diving, weightlifting, table tennis, artistic gymnastics, shooting, and badminton. 5 out of 6 sports here are skill-based, and all of these these sports matched the 5-word principle. China's decision to focus their resources in these sports paid off in terms of maximizing gold medals. However, it also had the consequence of stunting the development of many of China's team sports. Ball sports were not a priority in the strategy, so sports like soccer and basketball suffered, leaving them to play catch-up even now. Chen and Zhang, in their paper detailing China's gold medal strategy, interviewed a senior retired official from China's General Administration of Sport who elaborated more on the impacts of this strategy. In order to carry out the Olympic strategy and effectively enhance China's gold medal performance at the Olympic Games, a number of high investment but slow return sports were strategically cut down by the then Sports Ministry. This was a structural reconfiguration of the elite sport landscape in China. 3 big balls, football, basketball, and volleyball, were the main objects of cutting down. The rationale was that these sports required very heavy investment, cost much money, but had very limited number of gold medals and medals, and took a very long time to bear visible fruit. Instead, focus was given to small, fast women, water, and agile disciplines. Now, not to confuse you, because I know the visual in Chen and Zhang's interview just then threw out a completely different set of words. Like, where did fast, water, and agile come from? The best explanation I have for this discrepancy without access to official documents is that it's either a result of different translations or an evolution of the strategy over time. I will say though, small, skilled, difficult women and few is what Chinese netizens use to refer to the 5-word principle, whilst every English source I came across uses small, fast, women, water, and agile instead. So I kind of rolled with the Chinese version, but if anyone has a definitive answer, please let me know. Coming back to China's gold medal journey though, at this point we're caught up with the present. China has devised a strategy based off Tian's clustering theory and executed on the 5-word principle. They're now getting their gold medals and they've achieved much of the success they were aiming for. But this is not where the story comes to an end. Far from it, actually. It sounds crazy, but I think China is just getting started. Suffering from success. It's a problem I would love to have, but clearly and regrettably, I don't have it. You know who is facing it though? China. In the Paris Olympics, China's diving team pulled off a sweep and won all 8 gold medals the sport had to offer. In table tennis, China was so dominant that in 2012, the Olympics changed the format of the sport so that only 2 competitors from each country could enter the singles events. When you're too dominant, it's not even about new rules being put in place, but quite simply, there's only a certain amount of gold medals for you to win. No matter how much more China invests in diving and how much they optimize for the sport now, they've already hit the ceiling. There's only 8 gold medals for them there. And China's strategy has evolved as they've realized this. They started out by investing in their strong sports and targeting light sports to maximize the chances of winning gold. But now, if China wants to keep growing that medal count, the only way for them to get more is to go after sports they haven't traditionally been good at. Project 119 is an example of such an effort. It was an initiative created after the 2000 Sydney Olympics, and it was a long-term project initiated to improve China's performance in weaker areas like athletics and swimming, amongst other sports. A lot of the sports they chose are also medal abundant. Therefore, 119 is actually 119 because it stands for the number of total gold medals that are available in the sports being targeted. And this year, we saw China making quite the splash in these sports. Pan Zhanle broke the world record for the men's 100-meter freestyle in Paris, and the Chinese team won the 4x100-meter medley relay. This is huge because A, China is not really known in the eyes of the general public to be a big swimming powerhouse. I mean, just look at how people reacted after Pan won the 100 free. And B, if we look at where the medals come from in Paris, swimming produced 2 gold medals. Badminton, a long-time core sport for China, also contributed 2. Further, swimming yielded 12 total medals, whereas badminton produced 5. Swimming is a sport with more medals to offer, which means more gold up for grabs. And we know China is going to go for it. What I want to shift our attention to now is the debate that's been going on among Chinese people on China's current sports system and what sports will look like for China in the future. China still operates on a largely centralized sports system, and if you recall, this was created decades ago because it was the most effective way to produce elite athletes in a population that that wasn't heavily engaged in sports. And China back then was also eager to prove themselves on the world stage. Now, China is very different to what it was like 50 years ago. And this is where people are divided on whether or not China still needs its centralized sports system. It's a very complex issue as it ties into social, political, and economic spheres. So in an attempt to summarize these viewpoints, I will be oversimplifying some parts. Essentially though, you have one side that favors moving away from such a system, and they question whether the funding can be used in places that can benefit more people. Like, instead of investing for a small group of elite athletes to win gold, can we redirect these funds to encourage the general population to play more sports? And a newer sentiment that's emerging with the side is, well, how much do we care about gold medals anyways? Instead of investing in more niche sports or expanding into a competitive solo sport, could we invest more into the team sports that were neglected in the initial strategy for gold? To summarize more succinctly, this side is asking, is it time to reevaluate our priority of maximizing golds? Is there something that is worth more to the Chinese identity and sense of accomplishment than just the number of gold medals won? Now, the other side is saying China still needs the centralized system. First, you can't change a whole culture overnight. Even if you redistribute funding, Chinese society is so geared towards academics that money alone is not going to solve the fact that the environment itself is not conducive to fostering a passion for sports. And the Chinese government has invested in getting the general population to be more active. But even if you put in mandatory hours during school for kids to exercise and do physical activity, as soon as it's over, they're going to go back to studying because their future is overwhelmingly dictated by their academic marks. Second, the centralized system allows kids coming from disadvantaged backgrounds to have access to sports and a way to change their lives. A common example is Tian, China's 17-year-old diving prodigy who would have never touched a diving board or become a professional athlete if she wasn't scouted through the system. One Chinese netizen says, with a centralized system, people will complain about wasting taxpayer money, but without such a system, the same people will complain that sport is now only for the rich. People on this side may vary in how much they back the centralized system, but they don't really see a realistic alternative due to various social, cultural, and political factors. There is a lot to this debate. It's certainly not the first time people have brought this up, and interest in this topic has only reignited after the Paris Olympics. This is an ongoing discussion and it'll continue to evolve as the future unfolds. It's hard to say for sure what China's future may look like, but we can be certain from examining China's past that their climb to the top of the Olympic tally is as calculated of a move as it comes. Tian's clustering theory and China's 5-word principle were core to shaping its elite sports scene today. As China begins to hit that saturation in certain targeted disciplines, the sports they haven't traditionally been good at will become increasingly important in growing their golds. But not everyone agrees with investing so much into golds, as Chinese people have a lot of thoughts on the centralized sports system and also on where they would like the future of Chinese sports to go. I hope this was an insightful video for you all. I had a lot of fun researching this topic and it helped me forget that the next Summer Olympics won't be back until 2028. That is so long. At least Winter Olympics are coming up. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, make sure to subscribe so you can see me next video instead of when I milk this topic again in 4 years for LA. And a big thank you, as always, to my wonderful patrons. Thank you for watching all the way until the end. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!